So, I really like A Muppets Christmas Carol. And since I'm a crazy person, I decided to make an outfit inspired by Miss Piggy, or Mrs. Cratchit in the film. And this is the result. The dress that Miss Piggy wears in the film, or Miss Cratchit, is an 1830's gown, but I really wanted to make an 1840's gown, so I made a few adjustments to the design. The first adjustment I had to make was fabric choice, because I couldn't find a fabric matching exactly to what she wore in the film, and I wanted to go for a fabric that had more purple in it, but I just couldn't find one that had more purple. So I settled with this lovely green Christmas fabric. And the pattern is somewhat similar to the checkered print that she wears in the film, so I thought that was good enough. So the sleeves that Miss Piggy has in the film are 1830s sleeves, so they would have been appropriate for 1830s, but since I wanted to make an 1840s sleeve, they needed to be significantly smaller than the big poofy sleeves of 1830s. Starting off, I measured myself in my corset. And then I drafted onto paper of what the shape should look like according to a few fashion books that I have on the subject. And they had these really specific dart shapes, which I ultimately ended up not using, but the first draft that I made was based on those. So I made another draft out of more fabric. I try to use as little fabric as I can for these projects. So first I started off making the lining out of a white cotton before I went on to my final fashion fabric because it was expensive. I cut it at a bias so that the stripes would be kind of a diagonal pattern instead of a straight up and down to indicate that it was cut on the bias on Miss Piggy's dress, so I followed that on mine. I tried to pattern match it the best I could, but I mean, and it ended up not being as matched after I did the buttonholes, which was okay, I'm fine with that, but the effort was made. And I did the technique that they would use at the time, which is flatlining all of the pieces together. And since I started with the bodice, I did the bodice first and made the darts before I went on to the sleeves. The darts were kind of tricky on this bodice. I wanted 2 darts for the bodice front, and on some of these accent examples that I did more thorough research on in my other video, my 1840's like wedding gown I did in my last video, I did research on how they often had like 4 darts in the front of a bodice and how that was more common in the 1840s, so I incorporated that into my design because the one that Miss Piggy wears is like oddly gathered and I didn't really want to do that. Also, I couldn't really get a very good look at it because she only has the fichu off for like a scene in the movie. For the back, I just did the common 3-panel back that they had in the 1840s, and in the 1830s they had that as well. So for the sleeve shape, I looked at the cut of women's clothes from Nora Woe, and I basically drafted my sleeves off of that after making measurements on myself to see how wide I would want the sleeves to be at strategic places. I left a little extra room on the top of the sleeve to have it gathered a little bit, and I ultimately ended up just folding over the fabric to make like a, almost like a pleat in the fabric, as you can see. Most of the seams on Miss Piggy's gown are actually piped. So I made piping for essentially all of my major seams. So I did, based on Miss Piggy's, the arm size, and then I also did the very front of the closure. I piped those, and then I piped the neckline. And oh, I also piped the back seams of the bodice. And for the piping, I took yarn that I had because the piping that I bought was too big, and I double folded the yarn so it'd be a bit thicker because originally it'd be too thin for the piping for it to really show. So I doubled up the yarn and then I encased it in the fabric scraps that I had. So the buttons were a journey. I hand covered them, which is something I've never done before, which is similar to Miss Piggy's, as she also had covered buttons, and that's what I was going for, is the covered button look. I essentially just took the scrap fabric left over from cutting out the bodice pieces, and then I wrapped them and then just sewed them. With the same thread, I just sewed them to the bodice. And I made 6 buttons, which I feel like was appropriate. I've seen a lot of larger buttons. I went for the larger buttoned look. And for the buttonholes, I kind of messed them up a little bit because I should have done an initial stitching to make sure they wouldn't, I don't know what the right term is for this, but warble a little bit. They kind of got a little warped when I hand sewed with thread on to cover up the raw edges, but then I had to go over it again in embroidery thread because the sewing thread just wasn't enough to cover up all the frayed edges of the actual buttonhole. For Miss Piggy's, the dress seems to have a straight across waistband, which I saw in a lot of extant examples from like 1830's and also going into 1840's, so the 1840's had more V-shaped skirts and bodices, you know, like dresses where the waistline was more curved. But I went for the straight across look, which I saw in a few extant examples as well. For the skirt, I looked at extant examples of how this like 1840s skirts were pleated and such. It's a type of pleating. It's not cartridge pleating. It's like, I always think of it as like school skirt pleating, where it's that really specific pleating where it goes in and then out, and then some parts stick out more than others in the pleating. So I just did that style of pleating, which I can't remember the name. The skirt was one piece of fabric that I just sewed in one place, and then I cut a little extra to make the opening of the skirt, because the skirt's opening would be opened a little bit farther so you could get the dress on and off, because if it was just straight it'd be harder to get it on and off. It hid the slit of the skirt in a deep pleat in the front so it's not really visible, which turned out really well actually, and I'm really proud of that because you can't even see it when I wear it, which was the entire point. And since I added a waistband, I needed to attach the skirt to the waistband instead of just the bodice. And I added hooks and eyes to make sure the waistband closed properly. And I attached the skirt to the waistband. I did the pleating. And for the hem, I just hemmed it by hand at the bottom. And now, here are some beautiful clips of me wearing the dress in all of its glory without these accessories. So, enjoy! thank you so much for watching, and I have a very exciting video coming up, so you better tune in for that one. Thank you. Goodbye. Merry Christmas. Good greetings to you all. I messed up my fichu.